When we think we know it all, that's the best sign that we need to pause and listen, because truth matters, and it's worth the effort to discover the myths that are limiting our influence in our relationships. Busting myths. That's our topic on this episode of the Educators Among Us podcast.
Welcome to the Educators Among Us podcast, where we share motivational messages and inspiring stories for and about educators. Your host, Scott Barron, is author of the critically acclaimed book, Love 'Em and Lead 'Em, and provides powerful insights and wisdom for those who heed the call to teach, coach, lead, and serve at all levels of education.
This is Scott Barron, and I'm honored to be your host for the Educators Among Us podcast. We are coming from South Africa, a beautiful country, and we're in Durban, South Africa today, where we've been leading a workshop for educators from across the continent. And it's been truly a blessing. We've been able to experience an incredible level of friendship, of joy, of excited people, of great educators, lots of talent in the room. And as we prepared to come over, we encountered a lot of myths, a lot of things that people told us, have warned us of what maybe we would experience and the type of situations we might run into. And it turned out to be very untrue as we validated that. And it's an important part of the experience and the encouragement for this week that I wanted to share with you. It's similar to what John F. Kennedy once said, but the great enemy of the truth, right, is very often not the lie. You know, that lie that's deliberate and contrived and dishonest, but it's the myth. Right? It's that myth that's persistent, it's persuasive, and yet it's unrealistic. Right? Those myths in our lives are real, and it's something that we have to consider as we move forward as educators, as we're trying to grow. It's like this experience that we've had here, is where we had a lot of warnings, and yet it was not nearly as was described. We actually came across people that had a level of societal commitment to each other, of a joy with each other, and the hospitality that we experienced was truly unbelievable, right? And so all this caution that was urged, right, it came out of a lot of myths, right? It came out of as we traveled the country. When we went from Johannesburg down to Cape Town, back up to Pretoria, over to Durban, and what we found was just so not what we had heard, right? From all the news and the other guidance that we received, it was not at all. We spent time listening to their stories. I mean, we've had some great conversations to understand what's happening in their classrooms and in their schools and in their communities and in their countries, and to see what some of the challenges they're running up against. And it turns out it's very similar to what's happening in the United States and in other parts of the world, where we're all dealing with some of the same constraints and some of the family challenges, and working with parents and colleagues and students, and pursuing a vision together, and getting on the same page and building a healthy culture. Yeah, even as we traveled everywhere, we understood their perspective, and it was really interesting to see that we are all dealing with some of the same challenges, and to see some of the ways they were approaching those challenges and trying to solve for them. But this idea of myths is something that we have to be honest with. Right? Mark Twain said one time, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you into trouble. Right? It's what you know for sure that it just ain't true. Right? It just ain't so." That's the challenge that we run up against in education, frequently, right? I mean, sometimes we're having to deal with a parent who has heard news from their student, who brought home a version of it that often has some motivated reasoning with it, right? It's got some additions to the story. It's some pieces maybe were woven together into a myth, right? We deal with these things, but it's important that we leverage the ability to establish shared experiences and respectful conversations. Those are very effective antidotes to that poison of myths, of verdicts reached generally in a lot of overconfidence and yet unqualified judgment. And we all do it. It's not an accusation. I do it as well, and I have to be very careful that I'm not allowing some of those myths to get in the way of my relationship, of my ability to love and to serve people, and even to lead them. Right? We all have that tendency to filter out the facts. Right? When we filter the facts, right, preferring conclusions previously concluded. We want to hang on to those things because sometimes we've repeated it for so long, we actually believe it now, even though a lot of the underlying structure of that story, it's not grounded in reality. So, you know, as we struggle through that, we have to remember that we have to take that time. Who has time for the truth, right? Who has time to go after and do the research and maybe think through things when opinion has already arrived? That's one of our challenges, right? It does take effort. It takes investment. Sometimes it's just untrue, and yet it's undebatable. Well, that's a risk. That's not living with a thoughtfulness, wisdom, and intelligence. Right? We have to stay open. Sometimes it's unethical, and yet it's unstoppable. I mean, sometimes we're dealing with some very unethical situations, and yet it keeps going. All built around these myths. Sometimes it's unkind, and yet it's unavoidable. We know that some of these things that are happening are very unkind towards other people. It limits our relationships and our capacity to love them, and yet we still get caught up in it. Right? So here's the caution: have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, those myths, those undermining descriptions and stories that we repeat over and over, but rather expose them. Allow the vulnerability to challenge the myths. Allow those stories. Sometimes it's stories about ourselves. Sometimes we create our own myths internally, but a lot of times it's about other people. And we kind of bind ourselves in because we sometimes share those myths with other people, and we create gossip and dissension, and they're the poison of schools. Intelligent people like us, we can consider alternative versions, right? We can consider conflicting perspectives. We can stay open to that. We can weigh the evidence and benefit from new and valuable insights. That's part of that growth mindset that we so often talk about, but it's much easier to talk about than to actually do it. Right? We want to learn from those new and valuable insights through honest and humble reflection. It's part of the joy of our work because there's always more to the story. We don't know what we don't know about our colleagues, about our students, about our parents. And we have to be careful not to fill in the gaps with the myths. Right? Allow the gaps to exist. Take the time to have the conversations. Life, life is way more satisfying when we stay open to those possibilities. When we stay open, allow people and relationships to grow. We want people to give us that benefit. We want them to assume the best of us. We want them to allow us to get past the myths, and it's important that we allow that as well. Of course, we can do it. We can exercise that level of grace because we've been given so much grace. Right? We've been forgiven so much, and so it's a little bit easier to forgive others. We are blessed. Tammy and I are so blessed from our experiences here in South Africa. It has been phenomenal. And we'll be back. I can promise you we're going to try everything we can to come back and be a part of some of the journeys of these educators because they're changing lives in phenomenal ways. And we're going to be praying for them and encouraging them from afar and hopefully continue as a part of their journey of excellence because we've got some folks that have said, hey, we want to be a part of that. We get where you're going with this, and we love what you're doing with trying to provide the best environment for educators to thrive and to love and lead. And boy, we love that perspective on education leadership, and we want to be a part of that. And of course, it was so humbling to be able to share some of that with them. So the encouragement for this week is Bust a few myths this week, my friend. Bust a few myths. Not moves, not busting moves, but busting some myths, right? Pursuing relationships and perspectives, even when it means getting uncomfortable. That's what we do, right? Growth, growing up, growing forward. We are just given the opportunity to love in so many powerful ways if we keep our minds open, if we avoid those myths and being so confident of what we have no business being confident of. As you go forward this week, a real encouragement for you because you change lives. Your influence sometimes isn't realized until eternity. But because of who you are, because of the model that you set, because of the way you love and lead, you make a big difference in a lot of people's lives. So our encouragement to you is bust a few myths this week. Go get them. Love them and lead them, my friend. This is Scott.
Thank you for joining us for the Educators Among Us podcast and for your courageous commitment to this noble calling. We get you and the challenges of this work. To stay connected with this community, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and weekly encouragement at educatorsamongus.com.